Hello. Are we on? Hi. Hi, everyone. I haven't even done anything yet. Hi. We're so excited to have you here. Welcome to the Green Space, New York Public Radio's live performance venue. My name is Audrey Cooper. I'm the editor-in-chief at WNYC, and we are just so excited to have you here tonight. We are also super thrilled to be collaborating with U.S. Democracy Day and the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Yes. So we're gathering tonight for civic discourse. We don't get that a lot in America nowadays, right? But it is a hallmark of public radio. And I'm here to remind you that New York Public Radio is listener supported. If you are already a member, where are my members at out there? Thank you. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. If you are not yet a member, we invite you to become a part of this magnificent community. Look how smart they look and attractive. They're so great. Of course, a gift of any size is welcome, but a monthly sustaining gift gives us the stability to weather these political storms that we're facing, but also, what's dear to my heart, the freedom to create journalism that endures. There's a QR code, yes, on the screens behind me. You can click on that and learn how to be just like these smart, intelligent, beautiful people out here. We really appreciate that support. There's no doubt tonight you're going to hear some examples of how we maybe have never before been in such a polarized environment. And that's why public media has never been more valuable, but it's also never been as vulnerable. We get through this not by breaking apart, but by standing together. And speaking of standing together, I am super excited to introduce a woman who is a true champion of local journalism, not only here in our region, but across the country. Stephanie Murray is the director of the Center for Cooperative Media and a member of the U.S. Democracy Day Organizing Committee. Stephanie.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you to Audrey, and thank you to WNYC for hosting us here. When we reached out to WNYC to ask about this partnership, we were really excited to work with them because of the amazing reporting they do, everything that they contribute to civil discourse and amazing journalism in New Jersey as well as in New York. So thank you for everything you do for reporting in our state, and we're so grateful to be here. So thank you to Audrey, and also I want to say thank you to the Green Space team, Emily Botine and Brian Wild, who have been amazing to help us get this event going. Thank you so much. Also, tonight's event is sponsored by the Knight Foundation. So Knight Foundation has sponsored Democracy Day. They've given us funding to do this collaborative for the last several years, and we're really grateful for their support. And we are here because today is the International Day of Democracy, which many of you, yes, let's give a round of applause for democracy. You may not have known that. A lot of people in the United States don't know that September 15th is the International Day of Democracy, and it's celebrated around the world. And we've been trying to get news organizations in the U.S. to mark Democracy Day for the last few years and use today as a time to talk about their democracy reporting and to talk about all the different ways that they cover the way democracy works and does not work sometimes in our country. And this is the fourth year that we've done it, thanks to support from Democracy Fund, Knight Foundation, and our amazing organizing committee. This is a group of people that have come together across organizations, and we coordinate the project out of Montclair State. That includes 3 people who are here tonight, Will Fisher, Joe Amditis, and Jessel Noor, and 3 who are not, Michelle Foss-Ragavan, Rachel Glickhouse, and Bridget Thorson. So I'm really grateful to them and all of their help. We've had about 200 to 300 news organizations participate over the last 4 years. And this year, we're doing things a little differently. This is the first time we've hosted an event. And so I'm really grateful that you all came out tonight to listen to this conversation. And I know you're here because you care about democracy, and you care about civil discourse, and you care about talking to one another and making sure that our democracy is as strong as it can be. So I'm grateful to you for that. And I'm really excited. Today's the first day I got to meet Brigid Bergin in person. It's like she's a star. I've listened to her for a decade. And so Brigid is graciously hosting this conversation. She's the perfect person to do it. She is the senior politics reporter for WNYC and Gothamist. And I'm really grateful to her. So Brigid.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephanie, Audrey. It's so great to be in a room together to talk about democracy on Democracy Day. I want to welcome everyone who's in the room, and I also want to welcome our listeners who are on the live stream. We would love to have you here, but we're glad you're participating in any way that you can. As Stephanie mentioned, I have been here at WNYC for almost 2 decades. Most of that time, I've been covering elections and democracy. I'm joined by this very esteemed panel who have traveled in just to have this conversation with you tonight. At the end of the panel, we have Brandon Tensley, based in Washington, D.C. He works for Capital B. Next to him, Elizabeth Estrada. She's based in Philadelphia, working at PA Spotlight PA. I did that. I keep flipping that on myself. And then next to me, George Chidi. He is from The Guardian, and he's based in Atlanta, Georgia. We are all journalists who cover democracy, and what a time it is to cover democracy. Here in New York City, as you probably know, we have a mayor's race that's garnered some national attention, both from the left and the right. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders was here recently doing a town hall with our Democratic nominee, Zohran Mamdani, and President Trump, New Yorker that he is paying a bit of attention to this mayoral race. And we have seen stories around the country, whether it's the increase in immigration sweeps or the deployment of the National Guard, mid-decade redistricting, or the uptick in political violence. We have a lot of work to do. As nonprofit media outlets, we really have an opportunity and an obligation to report these stories, to bear witness, and to ask questions when government is and is not, as Stephanie said, working. So tonight we're going to take you behind the scenes. We're going to share with you the kinds of conversations that we have in our newsroom with our editors, that we were just having in the green room before this event began, about how we are navigating this time, digging into some of the stories that have been leading the news cycle, the challenges we've faced while reporting them, talking to sources, building trust, and trying to engage our audiences in a meaningful way so that they feel like their voice matters. So we're going to dig right in. We will have a time for you to ask questions at the end of our conversation, and we'll also take questions from the live stream. So be thinking of anything you want to follow up on as you're listening to us tonight. But I want to start with the panel and what it means to be a democracy reporter. It's not the same as just being a politics reporter. How did democracy become your beat? And I'll just set it off with how it really started for me, which was as I was covering City Hall here in New York City, I started getting really interested in this agency that no one seemed to pay attention to, and that was the Board of Elections. And I thought, that's a quirky place. There are these 10 commissioners, and they're appointed by political parties, and so they're accountable to political parties in each of the 5 boroughs. What a wacky thing. And so I kept building sources and relationships there, and then right before the 2016 presidential primary, I was doing a story about the number of voters, new voters. And as I was reporting it, I learned, oh wow, there's this huge drop in the number of voters in Brooklyn. And it turned out that that is a story that we refer to now as the Brooklyn voter purge. It led to a federal lawsuit and a federal monitor and oversight of the Board of Elections that had not been in place prior to that reporting. And I think from that point on, what we talk about as democracy reporters, and that I say often in my newsroom, the administration of democracy, how we actually run elections, is something that's become very central to my reporting, because it happens all year long, even if people only pay attention when an election is happening. So that was my entree, and it has been part of the work I've been doing ever since. Brandon, how about you? How did you become a democracy reporter? What does it mean at Capital B?
Yeah, I mean, for us at Capital B, democracy is very much sort of braided into all of our beats. It's about how can people equally, people from all communities, participate socially and politically in U.S. society. I think for me, on the politics beat, often what that means is looking at voting rights. For me, I'm from South Carolina, from Columbia, South Carolina. I've always been sort of fascinated in that relationship between, state governments, between various marginalized communities, and access to the ballot box. And so for me, I've just always been fascinated by sort of like what this looks like, how are voting rights battles that we've had in the past, how are they being repeated, how are they being relitigated. I still remember being in like my AP government class in high school and seeing that, in my mind, really famous political cartoon of a political gerrymander. This like very sort of like wonky jargon, but just I never thought that, 20 plus years later or whatever, that I would be focusing so intently on racial gerrymanders, on political gerrymanders, and what they say about the health of our democracy.
How about you, Elizabeth?
So I feel like I've always done a little bit of democracy work. I just wasn't necessarily getting paid for it because both of my parents are Cuban. And in my family, when they became U.S. citizens, I was always the person being like, okay, are you ready to go vote? Like, do you know who you're voting for? It's election day. Are you registered? Like, not only for my immediate family, but for my family in Florida. When my cousin went to college, like she would call me up and be like, I don't know who to vote for. Can you help me do research? And so I was doing this work a long time before I actually joined Spotlight PA. And I think I come to my democracy work as a democracy editor from that engagement perspective and really focusing on voters. And so at Spotlight, and something that informs my work is the belief that an informed electorate is really the bedrock, the foundation of a democracy. And so I want to give voters that information. And I focus on having a really voter-centric approach. And that means creating voter resources to help people understand what the stakes are, what's actually on the ballot, who the candidates are in Pennsylvania. And if it's kind of an off-year election, kind of like it is now, even though I don't even like that term, why they should still show up, why it matters, what's at stake. And so I really focus on connecting with people, connecting them to our democracy by sharing with them what they need to know in order to be able to confidently participate in our democracy.
So my democracy reporting career is, like most things with my journalism career, a terrible accident. Partly because of location. I live in Georgia. And I've lived in Georgia for about 20 years, and I've bounced in and out of journalism. Started off as a military reporter, did some tech stuff during the dot-com bubble, and then I got out, and I was doing other things. And I started to work for the AJC for a while, got out, started to do other things because, newspapers are going away. I came back to it in 2020 when, like, the election was going on and people were protesting in the street. And then, well, you know what happened in Georgia with the election. I was writing for The Intercept at the time. And I was watching the sort of confluence of political violence and the way the election denial thing was going on, and I started to write about that at length. And in order to write about that at length, you have to understand how elections work. I should mention, I was also, in the middle of those other things, an elected official for a short period of time. I was a city councilman for the city of Pine Lake, the mighty Pine Lake, population 780, not counting geese. So I understood sort of the basics here. On December 20th of 2020, when the electors meet, I went to the Capitol because I thought shenanigans were going to be afoot, and it turns out I was right. And I went into the right door in the Capitol, and I caught the fake electors doing their thing. I got subpoenaed by Fonnie Willis, and all of a sudden I'm on the New York Times and CNN, and my father in California is looking at me like, wow, this is real now. You're an actual journalist, aren't you now? And so I'm stuck.
The end.
Goals. I want to talk for a moment about the way we are seeing Americans say that democracy is under threat, and at the same time, the distrust in media. There was the NPR PBS Marist poll that has been quoted many times. 75% of Americans polled in that poll said democracy is facing serious threats. And at the same time, there's this growing distrust of the media. So we have this trust deficit. And I think we have probably all experienced it in our work. I know, when I was reporting on the special election in the 3rd Congressional District recently, that was the seat formerly held by George Santos, someone who you may remember. As I was trying to report and talk to voters about what mattered there, I had some reporters say to me, some voters say things to me about their fear about giving me their names, which is something that happens often when you're reporting. But the way they characterized their fears, they said they were afraid of being doxxed, which I thought, wow, okay, that was a new fear for a voter to be sharing with me as a reporter. It just meant that I needed to ultimately talk to more people to be able to do that work. But building that trust with sources can be really challenging depending on what you're covering. And Brandon, you reported on some of the mass layoffs from the federal government. Can you talk a little bit about how did you know you needed to approach those sources differently, and what did you do to build some of that trust?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was, a little close to home for me. So, my sister works for the federal government. I could sort of see very quickly the effect that it was having on her, just emotionally, psychologically, and hearing her talk about some of the experiences of her colleagues. And so for me, I was like, I can tell this is going to be something that might disproportionately affect Black federal workers, Black communities. At the same time, a lot of people were scared to talk, understandably. And so it was really slow going at first. It was having conversations with people multiple times on the phone to sort of let them know sort of the kind of work that we do at Capital B, the kind of reporting that we're aiming for, that, what's central to our work is really reflecting the experiences of Black people across the U.S. It was earning people's trust enough to be let into signal groups where I could meet other people. But it really was just like taking it slowly. And I think letting people know that I was more interested in I also cared about their safety, their security as a source, and not just getting the story done. I think helped to sort of position who I was in their own minds. This is somebody who cares about us as people, us as a community, as opposed to somebody who's in this to get the byline and move on to the next thing. And I think as I continued to report those stories, it got easier in that I think people saw the kind of journalism that I was doing, the kind of stories that I was writing.
Who were some of the people that you spoke to?
I spoke to people across different agencies. So people in the education department, Sharia Smith, who works with the union agency there, or union members. I spoke with people in the Department of Veteran Affairs. I spoke with people, retired federal workers, but really just trying to sort of capture this sort of cross section of fear that people had in the federal government, and especially I think a lot of Black communities, queer communities, marginalized communities, for whom DEI became a sort of boogeyman that put a target on their backs, is how they felt. And so even if they weren't doing anything related to DEI work. And so it really was just sort of a slow going process. But now, I think months in, it's much easier to be able to, you build a bridge with one person and it, depending on how that goes, it opens up doors to other people or, builds other bridges to keep the metaphor. So
Sure. I mean, George, when we talked about this idea of a trust deficit, prior to tonight, you reminded me how the dynamics of reporting on politics and elections in Atlanta, Georgia, is vastly different than what I'm encountering here in New York City. How do you cultivate sources who might see you as that guy who's in the New York Times?
So it depends on who you're talking to and what you're talking about. there's value in having news reporters who've been around in the community in visible ways for a long time. And I've been in Atlanta for about 20 years. I'm a known figure. I was a known figure before all of this stuff, because I get around. It's helpful, like, that you cultivate a relationship. It has to be very bipartisan, not neutral, but bipartisan, where where people have access to you, and they know where you're coming from. It is different in Atlanta in a lot of ways because it's a very polarized state. It's racially admixed, but it's also very politically admixed. And the thing we're really talking about here is credibility. I have a deep concern that traditional news is being supplanted by bloggers who can disappear, people who don't disclose their identity to the public, but they're putting out information that's going to be, taken as authoritative by someone else. And when it turns out to be untrue, they disappear and you never hear from them again, and there's no accountability for it. Like, I have a very long track record as a journalist and that helps with the relationship building.
I mean, Elizabeth, you encounter this, I would think, often in terms of how do you build trust, particularly in communities where maybe they don't have a lot of other news options. Can you talk about both a little bit more about the model of Spotlight PA and why you need to really listen to your audience in terms of providing them with the news and information they're asking for and they need?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Spotlight PA, we are an independent nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom. And our model is that we work with over 120 different partners across Pennsylvania's 67 counties, so all over the state. And these other journalism distribution, like they're digital, they're newspapers. Some of them are kind of more, I don't want to call them blogger because like they are really valued news sources in their communities, like citizen journalists, a variety of different kind of publications, public access stations, NPR affiliates. They redistribute our work. And so people may not necessarily go to spotlightpa.org to follow our work, but they're seeing it in their local newspaper on the front page. They're seeing it, when they go onto the website of their favorite site, or they're hearing interviews with our journalists when they listen to their local radio station. And it's hard to build trust when you're not necessarily located in a specific community, right? So we have 2 specific local bureaus that are located in different parts of the state, and those folks get to really dig in. They know the people there, they know the elected officials, and their relationship is a little bit different than some of the other folks who are reporting on, politicians who are in statewide offices. And so for us, it's really about taking it slow and building partnerships and creating visibility by just having conversations with people. When I first started my role, I just talked to a bunch of different people all over the state. One thing that is particularly important and a key element of my role is because Pennsylvania's population, especially like Latino population, has grown dramatically over the past decade, is ensuring that our work is also available in Spanish. And so I spoke with all these different community leaders and folks from different organizations across the state and kind of started talking to them about, well, what are you seeing in your community? What are people asking about? What do people need? And trying to serve them instead of trying to kind of reverse engineer it based on what I think, right? Because I don't live in these places. I'm not living that experience. And so thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe people don't necessarily want to know about some of the elections that are happening statewide, but they just really want to know, like, what does the city council do? What are they responsible for, right? These things that we kind of take for granted and assume that people know, these basic civics. If that's what people have questions about, then how can we partner and how can we make that information known to people so that they can use it and talk about it at home with their families, talk about it at home with their kids, and kind of create an understanding about how their local community works. So I think trust, I think that everything that a newsroom does either builds trust or erodes trust. And I really try to take that approach when I'm meeting with people, and just listening, I think, is the first step, and not assuming that I know what they need, because I don't. Sure. And I think sometimes it can be hard for journalists to accept that. Like, you go in thinking that you know the story, but you don't. You have to kind of ask questions so you can kind of get there.
Just to get a little nitty gritty for a moment, when you say that you go in and you're having these conversations, do you have any other mechanism for, do you hold a meeting or an event like this where people can come and talk to you? Or is there, are you doing it digitally? Is it a little bit of both? How do you get that input from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have had listening sessions in different areas across Pennsylvania, little kind of like pop-up newsrooms, if you will, where in State College, one of our bureaus, they will just kind of set up at a coffee shop and post their hours, and people can just kind of come and talk to them, meet the reporters, share tips, and just connect, right? So that if they encounter something in their community or they have a question, they kind of know, oh, well, I can go to so-and-so because I met them at a coffee shop. And now they're not just a random byline that I see online. They're a person that I shared coffee with, that I connected with, that I now have a relationship with and can kind of feel comfortable talking to. So we've done that. And then also, I don't want to get too nitty gritty about this, but one of our bureaus that we did open, we actually held a bunch of listening sessions to see if that was something that would be of value to that community. Like, do they want us to open up a local newsroom there? Is this something that's needed? And if so, what kind of reporting do you want? Like, what are you looking for? What's missing in the media ecosystem where you live? And so we've kind of gone about building trust in a variety of different ways, and it's resulted in different outcomes. And one of them is building a newsroom in a specific county, which I think says a lot about the state of journalism in Pennsylvania specifically, but also what happens when you listen to people and you don't just parachute in and make assumptions about what communities need, but just listen and respond.
I need to just say, you're absolutely right. It is the truth. And there is no substitute for being in person, talking to another human being, because there are people, like the internet is out there, and it is filled with hateful people that you can't identify. There's an example I want to bring in Georgia really quick. There's a journalist named Mario Guevara who is in detention because he's a Salvadoran immigrant, and his immigration paperwork wasn't where ICE wanted it to be, and he got arrested at a protest that I was at, because he was walked off the sidewalk when a cop walked up to him, and they arrested him for being in the street. That's 95 days ago.
For folks who might not have been following that story, because you've done some reporting on it, just tell people a little bit more about the work that he was doing, and why this, is obviously like a bright red flag for all of us in terms of the challenges to reporting that we may all face, but that he is currently facing.
Part of the reason I'm bringing up Mario Guevara in this context is because, so he was a guy that the community, the Spanish language community in Atlanta, which is vast, everybody had his phone number, had his cell phone number. And when they saw ICE show up in their neighborhood, they would call him directly. He would pick up the phone, he'd get in his white truck, and he'd go. And because he had relationships with ICE as well as the community, he'd go, hey, are you ICE? You're not wearing it? No, yes, we are ICE. No, we are not ICE. This is the DEA. Those are drug guys. And then he would tell that community in Spanish language, all right, so this is what's going on. Mm-hmm. And if ICE picked up people, he would talk to the family and figure out what actually was happening and then report that. And nobody else was doing this work. Yeah. He had a deep connection to his community. And it's hard to replicate because it took time, and a lot of legwork. And that's exactly what we need everywhere. Right. And not just in Atlanta, and it's not just about the ethnicity, it's just that depth of connection between journalists and the public, because that lack of connection is what's blown up trust, I think.
Brandon, I want to talk about, you have done some reporting also on, immigration in Washington, D.C., but as we were talking, there's a piece that you have up that is, the headline is Know Your Rights. And as I understand, that was actually kind of an extension of some other work. So if you could tell us a little bit about what you were reporting and why you made the decision that it was worth having this, what we call explainer, available to your audience as a separate piece from just the larger work you were doing.
Yeah, so initially that story, the Know Your Rights story, was part of a story that was looking at Black migrants kind of all over, but mostly sort of in the DMV area, and sort of what they were feeling, what they were experiencing over the past few months. And the sort of information about, the rights that you're entitled to if you're confronted by different federal law enforcement agencies was sort of wrapped in there in some ways. But one of our editors was like, actually, this feels like it could be like a separate piece as opposed to something that gets lost. Because it is like really important information, especially today. And so my editor was just like, okay, we can use this as like an explainer piece, especially as I think fear of deportations and actual deportations was ramping up. And so we made it into honestly a piece that's fairly evergreen, unfortunately. And that we can sort of update the top of the story with something more recent that happened. I think most recently we were talking about Chicago, the threat of deploying the National Guard to Chicago. But then the meat of the piece sort of stays the same. If you're confronted by ICE, if you're confronted by Border Patrol, this is what you can do. If you live, if you're a migrant or you live with someone who's a migrant, these are numbers to know, people to think about. These are the rights that they have. But it just felt like something that was very salient and the kind of almost like a one-pager. If somebody needed to know sort of like the minimum facts to stay safe, or maybe they wanted to send it to a friend. But that idea of like rights, like this isn't, putting our thumb on the scale of anything, but it's just like as someone in this country, this is what you're entitled to. And this is information that is important for you to know.
I mean, I think part of what this reporting underscores is something that we know, which is we don't do a lot of civic education anymore in this country around what our rights are, around what the role of institutions and the role of certain offices in government. Elizabeth, I know you were mentioning elections in Pennsylvania, and you have some explainers talking about just, what is the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court? What is the role of it? What prompted are you trying to fill that gap using, Spotlight PA to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing to fill, but I think that we're contributing, we're responding to questions that people have, and also I think to questions that people don't realize that they have. So actually today we relaunched our election center, so it's filled with an interactive guide about how much do you know about Pennsylvania's courts systems, because we have a judicial election coming up where there are 3 justices on our Supreme Court that are up for retention, and the way that works in Pennsylvania is that you get to choose yes or no because they are up for re-election, essentially. When they ran originally, it was stated on the ballot what party affiliation they were running under. But 10 years later, it's just a yes or no question. So you as a voter, if you're coming in and not realizing, you didn't do your research beforehand, you're like, wait, who is this person? We're explaining to you what a retention election is. We're explaining to you why there's so much money going into it right now in Pennsylvania, because they're trying to flip the bench, because right now it's majority Democrat. We're explaining to you what impact the Supreme Court has on Pennsylvania, different case rulings that have come out throughout the past decades, how that affects everything from access to abortion to election administration. In Pennsylvania, voting by mail was a very big thing, and it still is. There are still cases that we're waiting, that are pending. And so I really see it as my role to educate about democracy, specifically, in Pennsylvania, because people don't know. And it's hard then to explain to people why it matters, why it's important, if they don't even realize what significance these justices and these judges have over their quality of life. Ultimately, like the decisions that they make have repercussions for the political landscape for decades. And so we are doing that this year for judicial elections. We've done it previously for other statewide offices. And I know it's not sexy. It's not, as appealing, but it's important. And we know that people are looking for it because, first of all, we have this interactive kind of election assistant chatbot tool where people ask questions about Pennsylvania elections, and they're always asking, like, what is on my ballot and what does X do? What does Y do? And so they don't know, and I really see it as our responsibility to tell them.
You have an elections chat. You guys heard that, right? That is so cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. It is kind of an AI powered, but also not really, because we back check everything. So it's a tool that basically compiles all of our vetted reporting at Spotlight PA and combines it with resources from the Department of State. And we review every single answer. So it's not open like ChatGPT. It's not. It is like closed off. It's based on our reporting, which is fact checked. It is accurate, and people ask questions and it automatically responds. So we kind of have a good clue as to what people are wondering about when it comes to elections.
Oh my God.
Brigid is looking at me because I didn't mention this before.
Into this. Wow. Okay. We could spend more time on this, but George, I want to take a moment just to get into how complex this reporting is that we're doing, and particularly when things are so polarized. And I think it is easy to assume that a storyline is just one thing. You reported recently on the immigration raid at the Hyundai factory near Atlanta. Hundreds of workers were detained. But your reporting told me something that I hadn't read elsewhere. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So just basics. The ICE raided a Hyundai LG battery plant in South Georgia, and they detained 475 people, about 320 of which are Korean nationals, South Korean nationals. If they were North Korean nationals, detention would be a very different thing. They weren't expecting it. But there's, like, as I was talking to local sources, like, it became very clear that you've got to look. Like, you may have an opinion about, like, the sensibility of ICE right now, or the lack thereof, in terms of how they are enforcing things. But one might not necessarily assume that they're dumb enough to raid like $1 billion thing. Although I got to tell you, I've been waiting for them to go after the chicken plants in Georgia for nonetheless, this is a big diplomatic thing, and they had to know that there would be an effect, and they did it anyway. And how could they be so stupid? That is the question everybody's been asking. I'm like, well, how could they be that stupid? Maybe they were. It turns out that there had been a series of deaths at that plant, that started about 1.5 years, 2 years or so ago. Like, the name of the guy who first died was a South Korean name, then it was a Latino name, then somebody who's, I don't know. But the point is, I think that they began the investigation because they believed that there was a safety issue that was tied to the immigration issue, that the immigration status of the workers there was getting between OSHA and safety reporting. And so if you're ICE, maybe you have a moment of moral clarity and go, well, maybe, all right, I've got to go and we got to go and it's going to suck, but we're going to do it anyway. And Trump's going to be pissed at us, and we're going to do it anyway because we think we're saving lives. This is a possibility. They might just be dumb, but I'm saying.
When I read the story, to me, what was so interesting about it is just that you were reporting it out, which is what we need to be doing in all these cases. And I think, as we were talking before, what is the only thing that is clear, abundantly clear, is that story is not done.
Right.
And so to have the commitment to following through on not just reporting the incident, but then to keep going and keep reporting, that's a lot of work, but that's what we have to do.
Journalism is. I think it's the fundamentals, not just of journalism, but in fact of democracy journalism. I have open records requests out. I'm trying to get a hold of folks at OSHA. I'm trying to get a hold of folks at ICE. And a blogger who picks up something from the New York Post and then goes on TikTok and then talks about what he read there and their opinion about it for 2 minutes is not adding any information to the democratic decision-making around, was this a good thing or a bad thing? There's the First Amendment is what it is with the freedom of the press, because all of you good people here do not have 30 hours a week to go show up to meetings. You have jobs. You delegate in a very soft way that role to us and expect us to show up and then tell you what happened in a fair and unbiased way and to ask the questions you would ask if you were sitting there. That's the job. And I don't think democracy works without it.
Mm-hmm. One of the challenges I think we can run up against in reporting on democracy is feeling like we are fueling a sense of helplessness among our audience. And we know we have the responsibility to tell them how to engage and how to participate. But then we also, unfortunately, end up telling stories about the way, maybe someone has their thumb on the scale, the way someone is controlling, ballot access in a way that feels arcane and anti-democratic. So can you talk about how you think about reporting stories in a way when you know it's going to be something that may almost alienate your audience, but it's something that they need to know? And have you ever had to make the decision not to do something because you felt like this is not going to be good for, this isn't good for democracy, this isn't good for our audience?
I mean, the way that we anchor pretty much all of our stories is rooting it in people. Mm-hmm. And so what are the concerns of Capital B readers? What are the concerns of the people in our communities? And so often that's where we start with our reporting. So if it has a value in some way to sort of the shape, the meaning of our readers' lives, our communities' lives, that to us gives it news value. We're serving some sort of purpose for them. But I think to your point about hopelessness, it can get really hard to not always... It's easy in some ways to just focus on the bad things because there's so many things that have people so fearful right now. But I think one of my favorite questions to ask people in interviews, depending on what the story is what are people doing about this? Or have you heard of people doing anything about this? And I think you'd be surprised how many sources actually are already tapped into what people are doing locally to solve different problems. And even, this wasn't until I went to an event maybe a year and a half ago now, but it was looking at voting rights not in DC. The event was in DC, but it was looking at voting rights nationally. And it was the first time that I had really heard about state voting rights acts. And I'm one of those people who I learn something new about my beat and I become obsessed with it. But it's something that I've started seeing sort of again and again in different places. And especially as, we think about the different ways that people are, different actors are trying to curtail the right to vote. But as a solution, right? If you're in a state, Maryland is trying to pass a state voting rights act right now. But these sort of glimpses of what different organizers, different communities are doing to protect their democratic freedoms, to protect their democratic rights, I think is really special, really important, and something that's easy to overlook. I think even on like a sort of somewhat smaller scale, it's not like a statewide sort of like action, is a story that I've been reporting on for a while, is looking at this group of Black families who are trying to build sort of a resource support network for trans kids. And this stems from the fact that when their kids came out as trans, they didn't have, they said that they didn't see anyone else they could talk to. They didn't have any resources who could address that sort of two-front sort of challenge of a kid who is both queer and a kid who is Black. And so, they were building the resources that they would have wanted to see. But to me, I was like, I don't know if people would always think of it as like solutions journalism in that way, but they were responding to what they saw as like a deficit, what they saw as like a need. But that was just something that came from a conversation that I was having with a source who was like, oh yeah, like I heard about this person who was doing like XYZ. And then I got in touch with the families. I was able to talk with some of the kids who inspired that work. We were able to get our photographer at Capital B to meet up with some of the families to sort of capture this very hopeful sort of dynamic of this conversation that is otherwise, I think, really, rife with dread and terror. But again, it was just something that came from asking people, letting people talk, but then asking people just like, what are you doing? Because I think that there are a lot of people who are not, they haven't given in to sort of like a sort of sense of learned hopelessness. I think there are people who are actively doing things, and sometimes they might just need a prompt and a question in order to sort of get your motor going.
George, thoughts on, and I can't imagine that there are things that you have left out or stories you've ignored that you thought were worth pursuing. It's just how I'm getting to know you as we are. But
it's not that I leave things out, but I do think about like whether or not I'm going to be believed. Look, so I spent a lot of time writing about crime and politics, and from the perspective of a democracy reporter, you ask most people, is crime higher today than it was when they were kids? And most people are going to say yes, and most people are wrong. The crime has been falling. I'm talking to folks in New York, like who know this more than anybody else. Like, how far away are we from Times Square right now? Like, do you remember what it was like in 1985? Like, I don't have to. My people. So. Well, my point is most folks believe that crime is getting worse because the media tends to lead with crime stories. And so I have found myself at war with this narrative and trying to write in a very explanatory way. All right, here is what is actually happening in your community. Here are the statistics. Here is why I believe these statistics are true. Here are some case examples of what's going on. Here's why crime is falling, like just nitty gritty like that. But as I do this in my head, I'm like, how do I get this across in a way where, like, I'm not going to be shouted down by no, look at this, and then they'll give me some, like, whatever's in the news this week. Like, I mean, I'll say this today, and folks will talk to me about Charlie Kirk. Like, it's, like, crime is down. Oh, what do you, so it's, like, this terms of, like, it's not so much that I'm leaving stuff out. It's really trying to focus on the things where credibility is going to matter.
I mean, Elizabeth, we were talking about the challenge, even for Spotlight PA, in providing facts. Because what are facts if we don't agree on facts, right? So can you talk a little bit about how Spotlight PA approaches trying to provide, factual information to the audience so they can make these decisions when they go into a voting booth in a way that keeps your credibility and equips the voter to be prepared, but potentially stays out of this, polarization that.
Yeah, it's tricky because, like you just mentioned, if we're not agreeing as to what has happened, it kind of already turns the person off. They're like, oh, well, this is bias. Like, this is not true. And I think that there has to be an acceptance sometimes of, like, you're not going to get everybody, right? Like, sometimes people have already made up their minds. You're not going to reach them no matter how hard you try.
It's like a dagger in the heart, though.
Yeah, it sucks. It's awful. But Pennsylvania's a swing state, and people vote multiple ways back to back. And so there's a large group of people that when they read our candidate guides and they learn, oh, well, this person who's running for that office back in 2020, this is the example that I always use, was like, oh, they were an election denier. Like they didn't, believe that the results of the election were true. So I'm not going to vote for them. Or somebody will read the same thing and say, that's not true. That's not what happened. And it's a hard spot to be in. And, we do what we do best, which is we report, we vet the information, we put out the facts, but they will be interpreted very differently. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is working, because we get, I think, more positive emails from people who will say, it's like, I'm conservative, I'm a Republican, thank you so much for this. Or I'm a Democrat and like, I appreciate you, like, it doesn't matter. Like, we will go in and hold people to account no matter what party they're in. And I think something else that's happening too, which, people want more representation of like third parties in our candidate guides. And that's something that I will say, most recently we have somebody from the Liberal Party running for one of the judicial positions. And I think they must have filed like very late or something, because they were not there one day. And then the guy published, and my colleague who reported on it was like, oh, wait, I didn't realize that was there. And so I had to kind of go back and update some information that had not yet been published, but because that person is a candidate and like they need to be on there, right? Because if they're not, first of all, that's not correct. Like, they're going to be on the ballot. And then also people who are affiliated with that party will come after us and they'll be like, hey, by the way, like, they're not on there. And so, we do what we do, we put it out there, and we're going to get the reception that we get, but we know that the information is true and we stand by it. And it's hard in a place like Pennsylvania where, people will tell you what's on their mind. Like there's a lot of older individuals who will just like write, and like they just have the time to do so. Or they'll like recall like some other election when this one thing happened, and they'll make these connections. And I'm like, I don't know, I wasn't there for that. But we're putting it out there and we stand by our work, and it's vetted and it's accurate. And that may piss some people off, but like, we're doing our duty, and they get to make up their minds. They get to take that information and go into, their polling place, into the voting booth, and make their decision as to who they're voting for.
So I'm going to warn you that I'm coming to you for questions soon. So before we do that, though, I want to wrap up our portion of talking with each other with a little bit about what motivates you to do this really hard work. We have to kind of get up every morning going up to election season, election day, the day after, and continue to report on democracy, even when it's not necessarily the thing that everyone is focusing on. At the moment, I think it's the thing that a lot of people are focusing on. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why you do this work. You could be doing a lot of other things. You might be making more money. But, what drives you?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound so cheesy, and I apologize. But I think I think part of it is I think often about sort of like the legacy of the Black press and sort of like the importance of the Black press down through the decades, and if we can sort of contribute to that legacy in some way to keep our communities informed, to keep them keep a feeling of feeling represented in our media environment. To me, that's very important. I think another thing is also I don't know. I think about family. I think about sort of heritage. So this is like related to the first point, but every time I vote and I get like the little sticker, I always feel so proud as I go get my Starbucks. But like, I always feel so proud because I often think about how like under one roof in so many households, You have so many different generations of people who have such radically different experiences with the right to vote. You have people who are still alive today, and they're not that old, who remember what it was like to go to stand in line with their parents or their grandparents, waiting to vote, or they would get dressed up in their Sunday best because that was such an important thing for them to have. And so I think about that a lot when I think of having a sense of mission and a sense of purpose and duty. And on some of the darkest or hardest days, I just think back to, I don't know, what this could mean and what it has meant, and try to view myself in the context of something bigger than, my problems at the moment.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yes. Yeah, I think similar to what you're saying, Brandon. My family, my parents are from Cuba, and they're Cuban exiles, and they came from a place, revolution, upheaval. They didn't have a say in what was going on in their country. And growing up, even before my parents became U.S. citizens, it was just so important. We watched the news during dinner. We talked about politics. It was just part of our everyday conversation. It was so normal. And I was so excited to turn 18 and to be able to vote for the first time. And since then, I don't live close to my family now, but it's I used to go with my mom and my sister. My sisters go with their kids. We text each other. We send each other photos. I went last year when I was pregnant. I have a son now, and he's going to come with me this November. And I just think it's such an important thing to have that tradition around, but also something that we can't take for granted. And we haven't necessarily talked about democracy and beyond elections necessarily, as far as it pertains to my role. And I think it's not just elections, it's so much more. So I do just want to make that clear. But I think that when it comes to elections, right, it's this action that makes us feel like we are participating in something important, and something that so many people don't get to do who live in this country and other parts of the world. And that personal history is really what motivates me. And also information, people need information. They don't have it. I want to give it to them so that they can do with it what they will. Because like I mentioned earlier, if we don't have information in democracy, then what are we doing? What are we?
So, I am accused occasionally of being an activist journalist. And it's accurate in this regard. I am a pro-democracy journalist.
How dare you?
Think that I know. I should be neutral about this. Right. So, my father is Nigerian. He left Nigeria in the late 60s because there was a terrible civil war because democracy failed. And I grew up hearing about that failure, and I fear for that failure here. I could be doing a lot of different things. I always tell you I have an MBA from Georgia Tech. I never use it. Sometimes I really want to, but nobody will hire me for anything other than being a journalist. I have a very sort of sanguine view of what democracy is. I think of it in a very military term. This idea of two competing armies meeting on a Greek battlefield with spears in their hands, counting the spears in the hands of live soldiers instead of dead bodies on the ground, joining forces to go sack the next city. That's America. That breaks down when somebody thinks that they could get more by fighting and maybe losing than they do by teaming up. And that's what I'm afraid may happen. I view the work that I do perhaps as being a harbinger of this, to see whether or not it is actually happening, to be the canary in the coal mine, to tell the public, all right, it's done, or not. Or to be the person who say, no, we're still good. Because this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening, and this is normal, and yeah, that's broken, but we could fix that. That. I can't imagine that something more vital in this moment than looking at this with a careful eye, at being an authoritative person, and hopefully not the Cassandra who says, no, everything's fine, and then it blows up, or the other way around. I can't imagine a more important work I could be doing.
Well, I will agree with that and say that for me personally, that it being at a place like this, doing this work, makes me feel connected to the place that I live, to my neighbors. It makes me feel invested in my community. And then it makes me want to hold people in power accountable. From a constitutional perspective, from whether it's, at the city level, the state level, the federal level, I think we have what a former editor of mine used to call journalistic superpowers, because it is our job and it's our opportunity and it's our obligation to confront people with power with questions that they sometimes don't want to answer, and to ask for the documents they might not want to show us, but to do it because it helps us tell a story about what the facts are, what is true. And I know I speak for myself, but I think I can speak for all of us that we take a lot of pride in being able to do that for all of you. And I think at this point we'll take your questions. What you got? I see one way over here.
Hi. So I look around the room, and obviously the median age is 24. But what I'm interested in and concerned about is what's coming down the pike. Full disclosure, serve on this station's community advisory board. We have conversations with groups of listeners across the listening area. And it was a real through the looking glass moment for me when a month before the election last year, we had a conversation with high school listeners, and there was deep across the board distrust of almost all legacy media. Even things that we don't think of as legacy media. They don't trust Google because of the AI. They don't trust Wikipedia because of moderation. They get their news from content creators. They will even go so far as to say they don't think that people who aren't from their communities are qualified to report on them. That is a problem for journalism generally. But how does that square with your reporting on democracy? What, do you intersect with young people in any way? And if so, what would you say to them?
No, I'm happy to go. So I think one thing that we try to do is think about, we hear those very similar sorts of how people are divided in terms of like where they get their news. And I think part of what we've been doing at Capital B is thinking about how we can sort of go into those spaces and be in conversation with people. So whether that means like doing like more trainings on how to do Instagram reels, especially because it's like you have good content in terms of, you did the reporting, you have really powerful stories, you have the information, you have the facts. And it's like, how can you figure out different ways to distribute it? And so part of it is like doing events like this, which will reach some people. Part of it is doing standard sort of narrative stories, might be doing explainers, but it might also be doing TikTok videos, might be doing Instagram reels. But I think sort of to your point about thinking beyond sort of just like legacy media distribution models to how you can reach people to sound cliche, but how you can like reach people where they are. And if people are really thinking about, I don't trust, or I only get news if it's, in my TikTok algorithm, then it's like, well, how can you be a part of that algorithm? How can you sort of be someone who also has what you hope is like good, verified, legitimate information that's also being passed through these channels?
Can you say your name again? When you ask a question, would you just say your name? We're going to do it kind of Brian Lair show style, where you say your name and where you're from, just so that we can then, talk to each other.
Hanny Khalil from Prospect Heights.
Thanks, Hanny. So, Hanny, one of the things I want to add to that is I think you also have to make those audiences, those young people, feel like that they matter. Which is to speak directly to them and to acknowledge the role they play in the civic conversation. And, I'll say in, our coverage of the most recent primary, and I will also just qualify, Elizabeth makes a really strong point that not all democracy coverage is related to elections, though a lot of it is. But in our coverage of the primary, part of what we were doing was not just, reporting on what the candidates were saying, but going out and talking to some of those people who were working for some of these candidates. And, I went door to door with a 16-year-old volunteer who, wow, this kid has an amazing future. But it was also fascinating to talk to him about, you can't even vote in this election. What is motivating you? What is inspiring you? And for him, he was a Bangladeshi immigrant. His family saw in a candidate someone who they had never seen before. And he was inspired and was giving a lot of his time to go door to door for this candidate. Similarly, then you have to pay attention to actually what's happening. And we reported, I think, pretty much before anyone else, that when you looked at who was voting during early voting, the largest share of voters were 18 to 35. And so we saw that on day 4 of early voting, 9 days of early voting in New York. And so I said to my colleagues, we got to do the story again, because I want to see, is this like a blip, or is this going to look the same on day 6? And so on day 6, before we went into the last weekend of early voting, we did the story again, same trend. And so I'm like, this is really, wow, this is something. And so then after early voting, the polls closed on day 10, I was like, we have to do it again. We have to see, did it hold? Is that what happened on that last major push of a weekend? Is it still 18 to 35? The largest share of votes not only was young voters, a quarter of the voters were first-time primary voters. Something is different, right? And that kind of reporting we care about doing, and I think we do pretty well. And it matters, because then you're telling that audience, we see you, we hear you, and then we have an incentive to keep doing those stories, which we are. So that would be my answer, and hopefully bring them into us as a place to get their news as well.
Hi, my name is Christian. I am a German correspondent living in the US, trying to make sense of the country for
Good luck.
11 years now. I'm busy. My question is about the last couple of months, and especially the last week or two, and the avalanche of attacks that journalists are facing, or that media is facing, liberal democracy is facing, especially the discussion today. I'm wondering how you personally deal with questions of whether what we are doing is still meeting the moment, and whether, especially a beat like yours, which is important but also kind of niche, maybe frivolous a bit, that how do you answer yourself the question, am I still doing the right thing, and am I bringing the right thing to this fight?
It's just teed up for you.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Let me tell you, I don't have a lot of doubt about what I'm doing. I have a lot of doubt about what the political powers that be are doing. The media, to some degree, reflects, the leadership that we have in this country. And one of the thing I hear most is how there's a distinct lack of hope in the public. Why are my leaders not getting X done or Y done or Z done? And some of that spills over onto us. Hey, media, why are you not holding them to account so that they will do X or Y or Z and fix the problems that we see that are hurting us, that are preventing us from being able to have a family, buy a house, get a job that will sustain us? You talk to young people and they are ready to eat us, heads on pikes. And there's a general erosion of respect for authority, because authority has led to this for them. I don't think we're immune to it. I think what we're talking about is just this general sense of, what are you all doing? Get to work. If this is all screwed up, you're supposed to be holding them to account. Why is you're playing that you must be failing too? I think that's part of it. And Yeah, by the way, to the other fellow's point, like, I mean, he's absolutely right about kids tuning out. They're not alone. It's not just kids. It's a lot of people are tuning out the media all over everything. I do it sometimes. I reported on the Young Thug trial in Atlanta, and I did DJ Vlad's YouTube channel. He's got 5 million subscribers. Like, I mean, there are some younger people here who are sort of nodding their head like, yeah, I saw you. Because that's when I've been on CNN, nobody cares. See me in the street, like, I saw you on DJ Vlad. Is Young Thug guilty? Like that. Like, that's real. And I actually think the whatever we're gonna call legacy media, we need to adopt this. Like, we need to legitimize this. We need to bring them into the fold to the degree that we can, even if they look a little grimy from our perspective. Like, that's because that's what's being heard. So.
I also think that our roles are kind of a response to the actual moment. I think journalism has had some trends. Like a few years ago was engagement. Engagement roles are being funded left and right because we realize, these newsrooms should be engaging with communities, right? Like, we're writing about communities, we're just kind of popping in and out. We're not actually like listening to them. We're not actually breaking bread with them. We're not hearing what they have to say. We're not making space for them to respond to our reporting. And that was a few years ago, and engagement roles are around. They're kind of pretty permanent and expansive in different newsrooms. That's kind of where I started out in journalism. And it's still a part of my role today. And I think democracy roles have been really funded as a response to what's happening now. So, I think that we kind of are one with the moment, if you will, and it's not just these democracy roles, it's all beats. All beats are intersecting and interacting with what's happening, at the top level of our country's leadership. And it's on the local level, it's on the federal level, it's the economy, it's jobs, it's childcare, all of those things that, we're experiencing have some ties back to, this administration, the administration before, decisions that have been made by people that we've elected, people that have been appointed. And so, I don't know, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I feel like we're just going to see more of these roles kind of pop up and be really permanent fixtures, I think, in newsroom, because we're realizing, democracy is something that we need like a fixture for, and we need to be paying even more attention to. And it's not just political reporting, it merits its own beat because there's so much to cover. And even though it kind of bleeds into other areas, we need eyes on what's going on, and we need to hold people to account.
Over here?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm from Jackson Heights, live in Queens. I'm just curious, what's your take on this phenomenon of working people and union people voting against their own interests?
I don't know. That's between you two.
Working people, union people voting against their own interests. I think if I were to try to sort of frame that question, sort of like back to the kinds of communities that Capital B covers, and like why people might be voting in a way that doesn't actually seem to help them. I think if I want to be generous, I think one way to think about it is maybe thinking about the kind of information that they receive, the way that they're sort of understanding the stakes or not of elections, of what someone is saying, whether someone is serious about what they're saying. And so like whenever I think about how to wade into a potentially like controversial issue, I think about what is maybe sort of like the best like format to get across like information, right? How do I make people understand what I actually want them to understand? What are the actual the ramifications that people are saying of this kind of policy? Do we have examples of, this person voted this way last time or whatever, and, this go around, they feel they feel differently about it. They regret that decision. I don't know, but sort of like teasing out those kinds of stories and thinking about how it sort of connects back to how are people processing the information that they're getting or not processing the information. But, you know, I try to take on the responsibility sort of like as the reporter, as the journalist, and thinking about, is there a way that I can get information across and a better way to inform people?
We have one more.
There we go.
I think there's like, oh, there's over there.
Over here? Wait, how about this woman, the woman with the glasses? Okay. No?
Hi, I'm Jared. I work in television news and I live in Queens. I had a question about state public records laws. I know, I think, George, you mentioned it before. If you have any concerns about state public records laws potentially being rolled back and what impact that could have on democracy reporting.
Yes. So it's a negotiation, and it's always been. I mean, the laws in Georgia are fairly robust. You'd be surprised. The laws in Florida are even more robust. But what they do is, within the letter of the law, they'll say, we need a lawyer to review these documents to ensure that nothing slips through that shouldn't be there. And that lawyer costs $75 an hour, and you get the first 15 minutes free. And it will take 30 hours, and you've got to find $1,500. And like, this is how the game starts. I mean, if you're experienced, you understand how to play it. Like I'm very concerned about like federal stuff. I think they may just start lying to us. Start. Oh yeah, I get it. Like start. Like, what do you mean start? What I mean is, like, I mean, Trump just fired the head of the Bureau of Economic Affairs or whatever, and I'm worried that, like, I'm going to ask for records that exist. They're like, no, we don't have those. Like, I'm just straight up, like, I mean, there's a difference between
But I mean, I think
fighting you.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about state record laws. I think
Like,
one of the things that we experience here in New York, you know, at the state and at the city level, are persistent delays. And, you know, depending on the agency, depending on the relationship you may have with the record access officer, you know, you can sometimes figure out a way to work through that. There are oftentimes agencies that want to provide the records because they actually would like someone to be able to tell the story and have the documents to do it. Those are my favorites. But it's something that, you know, I think we are certainly, our antennas are up for any sense of rollback, but I think it would be naive to say that things aren't already challenging, you know, getting people to fulfill the requests that as they exist today. So
I asked for Governor Brian Kemp's browser history off his personal computer at work, and I got it. Like, haven't done anything with it. There's nothing there. He doesn't actually use his computer. It was the principle of the thing. Did it for fun, just to see whether or not I'd get it. Like, what I would recommend, like, and hear me, like, you all should be, every once in a while, showing up to a public meeting just on general principle, just to scare them. Like, go there and like, just rattle the cage and then go in front of them and be like, George Chidi sent me. and have somebody else with a camera to take the picture because I want to see the face of whoever it is that you whispered that in their ear. Like, but it's also the same thing with records. I mean, there would be some real value if people were just generally on alert, going like, oh, show me your phone. You comptroller, Brad Lander, I know that you look good, but give me. Like that attitude, I think, is valuable in the public. Like, to some degree, there needs to be a democratization of this power and this process. And I think that would be helpful, like, in terms of like making the public aware of what you can get and who is really ready to withhold from you, and then you hold them to account for that.
Because they work for us. They're here to serve us.
Absolutely. Thank you all
Right.
so much. I think that's a good end note. We really appreciate you being here. I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank those of you who joined us online. These are really important conversations, and we so appreciate your interest in engaging with us. Tune in, check out all of these great reporters and journalists' work, and let's keep talking about democracy.